Today, I'm going to explain a thriller movie called Worldbreaker. Spoilers ahead. Watch out. And take care. The movie opens in a distant future in which humanity's actions have wreaked havoc in unimaginable ways, with the melting of the Arctic polar cap caused by global warming. This has resulted in catastrophic disruptions and the separation of tectonic plates, all of which have given rise to hostile creatures known as breakers. These creatures have plunged human civilization into darkness as their virus targets the Y chromosome and transforms the majority of men into mindless thralls known as hybrids. As a result, the number of men has dwindled drastically, so women have taken over the battlefield to defend what remains of civilization. Women can turn into hybrids as well, but it is rare, and it takes much longer for them to transform after becoming infected. The story then focuses on a tough female commander who orders her troops to light the flares to illuminate the area. They then advance to face the breaker that lunges from the darkness. They fearlessly launch the attack with a fierce battle cry, with the commander standing on the front lines. The scene then cuts to the same commander's daughter, Willa, who is asking her dad about the origins of the creatures. Dad explains how humanity melted the ice and destroyed the forests, causing the spatial rifts known as the Stitch to give rise to alien creatures. He also tells her the story of Kodiak, a warrior who took out 100 breakers with just one swing of his axe. Just then, Mom also arrives, and she tells her daughter about the beauty of Earth before it was destroyed.
It was beautiful, honey. Everyone stared at their cell phones all day and forgot how to have conversations with each other. These damn monsters ruined everything.
The scene then cuts to Willa's 15th birthday, where the family celebrates with a cake, and Mom gives her a knitted hat as a gift. Meanwhile, Dad gives Willa a knitted rag doll, hoping that one day they will find a real one. But the warm atmosphere is interrupted when a soldier arrives with news that the camp is unsafe and they must immediately evacuate. Without wasting any time, Dad asks Willa to pack important items, to which the girl obliges. The residents now move toward the evacuation vehicle, and unfortunately Mom has to lead the convoy, so she gets separated from Willa and Dad. She asks her daughter to obey her father before leaving, to which Willa agrees. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere is very tense, and to reduce anxiety, one of the soldiers tries to explain why the virus only attacks men. According to her, the female nervous system is much more complex, and understanding women is indeed difficult, while the male brain is simpler and more easily infected. Willa then begins talking about Kodiak, and some believe he killed 300 breakers, while others think he had a pet bear helping him. Moments later, Willa falls asleep in Dad's arms, but she is soon awakened by the sound of gunfire. Dad signals her to stay quiet while the soldiers move in to reinforce the line. The situation quickly turns chaotic when a creature drags a woman with its long claws and begins slaughtering anyone who tries to escape. Although the soldiers fire at it, the creature can only be stopped by beheading, so their attacks have little effect. A terrified Willa hides under the truck with her father when a breaker approaches to attack them, but just in the nick of time, Mom finally arrives and severs the creature's head to save them. Next, Mom immediately orders all the survivors to run into the forest. In the midst of the escape, a soldier is forced to shoot an old man who is beginning to mutate due to infection. Another roar is heard in the distance, prompting Mom to send the survivors toward the next location while she and her troops hold their ground against the incoming attack. Willa does not want to leave without her mom, but the latter explains that these people need her and that she cannot abandon them. She promises to join them in a few days, so a tearful Willa reluctantly says goodbye and leaves with Dad. Afterwards, Dad takes Willa to the coast and reveals that he has prepared a small boat to take his daughter to a safer, remote land. But before they can leave, they hear cries for help from the forest, and Willa wants to help, but Dad stops her. Shortly after, a man appears and asks if it is their boat, but Dad lies and says no. However, the man does not believe him and immediately points a gun at them, forcing them to take him along. Dad then notices scratch marks on the man's back and realizes this man is about to mutate. Using the pretext of searching for fuel, he pulls the man away from the scene and finishes him with a knife. When Dad returns to the boat, Willa asks about the man, but he says the man got scared and ran away. The two then get into the boat and sail to the safe island, though it has limited food supplies. The scene then cuts to a year later, where we see Willa sitting on top of a hill, watching the explosions caused by battles on the mainland. Soon, a bird flies by, so Willa climbs a slippery cliff and finds a nest containing 4 eggs. She takes 3 eggs and then returns to Dad to show them, but he scolds her for climbing the cliff, which is very dangerous. But Willa argues that she's very strong, so to prove it, she begins a small battle with Dad using a wooden stick. Despite having an old injury, Dad easily dodges her attacks and manages to win every time. He has been endlessly emasculated by his wife, after all, and he cannot allow this madness to continue. That night, Willa misses Mom very much, especially the way she used to braid her hair. To comfort her, Dad tries braiding her hair, and surprisingly, the result turns out very good, which makes Willa smile. Dad once again begins telling the story of the legendary Kodiak and how he was the first person to see the stitch cracking on the ground, but he was not scared and bravely fought the creatures with his axe, and because of him, humanity learned how to kill these breakers, which is by destroying their brain. This makes Willa impressed, and she begins to suspect that her own dad might be Kodiak, but he dismisses the idea. The next day, Dad worries that the mutated creatures might be able to swim toward their island, so he plants mines along the shore. After finishing, he and Willa observe the ocean through binoculars and spot a breaker roaming across the water's surface. Dad explains that the creature does not have eyes, but it has heightened senses. These are far sharper than human perception, and they can also communicate with hybrids telepathically, as if they share a collective mind. In the following days, Dad continues training Willa, realizing that one day he will no longer be able to protect his daughter. The girl also learns diligently, and her movements begin to resemble Mom's more and more. In the afternoon, while working in the garden, Dad suddenly discovers a wild strawberry, which was long believed to be extinct. He gives it to Willa, and that small moment becomes a rare moment of happiness for both of them. The next morning, while fetching water, Willa is suddenly startled by a figure and quickly raises her weapon, but it turns out to just be a young girl like her, who slowly begins walking toward Willa. Willa panics because the area is full of mines and rushes to warn the girl. Luckily, the girl stops in time, after which she hugs Willa while breaking down in tears. Willa then guides her out of the danger zone and takes her to a secret cave. After Willa calms her with water and a small fire, the girl introduces herself as Rosie and explains that her family died after a breaker swam up and attacked their boat. Rosie is the sole survivor and begins crying in fear, so Willa gives her some food and decides to stay with her for the time being. In the evening, Willa wakes up from a nightmare and immediately rushes back to her home while Rosie is still sleeping. When she arrives, Dad almost shoots her, thinking she's an intruder, but he eventually stops himself. He has been very worried and asks where she was, to which Willa lies and claims she simply fell asleep due to heat exhaustion. Dad is worried and reminds her that food supplies are running low and the weather is getting worse. That night, after making sure Dad is asleep, Willa takes some food and runs back to the cave. She gives the food to Rosie, who eagerly begins eating, and she also shows her a book depicting how the world used to look before the breakers emerged. The two then discuss Kodiak, and Rosie believes Kodiak is dead. Otherwise, he would be out there winning battles. But Willa disagrees and says Kodiak cannot do everything alone and needs a team to win the fight. After their brief chat, Willa gives Rosie her favorite hat and her doll before returning home before dawn. The next day, Dad continues training Willa and is impressed by his daughter's growing skill. However, the training is interrupted when Dad suddenly collapses to the ground, so Willa rushes to his aid. It turns out that he has been starving himself and deliberately reducing his food intake just to keep Willa going. After bringing Dad into the house, Willa offers to make soup, but he refuses and says they must frugally survive until Mom returns. However, Willa is tired of waiting and says she does not want to remain trapped on the island anymore and wants to fight like her mother. Dad does not agree with this, which leads to a brief argument between them. After calming down, he opens a box and takes out his old sword, which he gives to his daughter. Willa immediately bursts into tears because ever since childhood, all she wanted is to be a fighter like her parents. The next day, Willa returns to the cave to meet Rosie with more food, but to her shock, she cannot find the girl anywhere. Furthermore, her hat and doll are also destroyed, which leaves Willa deeply shaken and confused. She then notices Rosie in the distance and calls out to her, but unfortunately, the girl has already transformed into a hybrid after being infected and begins growling. A panicked Willa falls in fear as the creature lunges at her, and it seems like it is all over for our girl. But just in the nick of time, Dad appears and begins shooting the creature, though it has no effect, and the bullets quickly run out. In desperation, Dad manages to stab the creature's head with his sword and crush its brain, finally eliminating the threat. A devastated Willa apologizes to her father, saying she only wanted to help the girl. However, However, Dad says there is no time, as the hybrid must have sent a signal to the other packs, and they must leave immediately before the island is overrun. Following this, the two rush to the side of the island where the boat is, but soon rest along the way due to Dad's poor health condition. During this, Willa finally tells him the information she got from Rosie, that the breakers can now swim. This alarms Dad, and he immediately quickens his pace, estimating that the mines he set will only hold off the group for about 10 minutes. And sure enough, from a distance, they spot a creature swimming toward their island, leaving them horrified. Soon the mines go off, and an explosion shakes the ground, followed by a terrifying roar. They then run toward the single wooden bridge that is part of their daily training. Willa crosses without any trouble, but as soon as she reaches the other side, she sees a breaker attacking her father. Willa immediately returns and swings her sword at it until she finally manages to behead the creature, but the creature's brain is still intact, allowing its body to rise again. It begins to attack Willa, but just in the nick of time, Dad smashes its head and destroys the brain, finally killing the creature. With this, the duo begins running again, and when they reach the beach, Dad suddenly stops and gives Willa instructions on how to start the boat. Willa is confused, so Dad shows the wound on his body, revealing that he is now infected and does not have much time before he transforms into a hybrid. This devastates Willa, and she refuses to leave without him, but he urges her to keep moving and says he will hold off the breakers. At this moment, the breakers begin advancing, so Willa rushes to shove the boat into the sea. It starts moving at first, but then it suddenly gets stuck, leaving Willa in a desperate situation. To make matters worse, Dad has begun showing signs of mutation, so Willa realizes she can only depend on herself. With trembling hands but firm determination, Willa draws her sword and prepares to fight. Dad watches proudly as she finally becomes the warrior he had always hoped for. In her panic, Willa suddenly hears the sound of a dog barking from the sea. She turns her head and sees Mom arriving with a group of survivors, carrying a living dog that had only been part of her father's stories. Mom then commands the boat's machine gunners to open fire on the creatures. Upon seeing this, Willa becomes even more fearless and shouts at the creatures to come closer as the movie comes to an end.